Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emmanuel Torquebio. My name appears here. My name appears here on my right-hand side. I'm a researcher with CIRAD, the French Agricultural Research Center for International Development, and I'm one of the co-conveners of the Knowledge Action Group, together with Cynthia Rosenzweig, who is absent from AgMIP, Columbia University, who is absent today, but is represented here by Caroline Mutter, who is one of the panelists. If we can dim the lights so that you can see the title of our session and my name appearing on the screen. I'm not sure who is dimming the lights. All right, it's coming, thank you. So the title of our Knowledge Action Group session this afternoon is Climate Smart Agricultural Solutions at the Interface between Knowledge and Implementation. The Knowledge Action Group of GACSA has as objectives increasing and promoting knowledge, research and development into technologies, practices and policy approaches for CSA. The priority work areas of the Knowledge Action Group are technical interventions and practices in climate-smart agriculture, evidence-based of CSA, support services and extension for CSA, inclusive knowledge systems for CSA, and integrated planning and monitoring for CSA. Now, over the years since GACSA was established, the Knowledge Action Group has produced a number of outputs in terms of practice briefs, policy briefs, videos, compendium on CSA and extension, map of web-based knowledge resource on climate-smart agriculture, webinars, etc. We have had very many outputs produced by the group over the years. All these are available on the website of GACSA, of course. We actually have regular contributions by members of the group. There is a non-stop flow of contributions coming by members of the group. As a consequence, we have had a problem for today's session, and you may be frightened by the number of panelists that you see on my right-hand side now. Don't be frightened. We have found a solution. We actually have had, because of these very many contributions to the Knowledge Action Group, too many people who wanted to talk. My first approach was the tough one. Well, let's ignore some of them and only have a selection of people talking. But there was a sort of gender balance in the management of the session. So Alison Chachan helped me, together with Federica also, designing a softer session where we would give a chance to everybody to talk. That's why you have so many panelists on my right-hand side. The solution is that all the presentations of these people have been installed on one PowerPoint presentation, and every person has been given only 5 minutes and 6 slides to talk. That is challenging, but the people have been briefed, and we assume that they will apply the rules. If not, we'll let them know that they are talking too much. So please try to make as well as you can, not to go beyond your 5 minutes, because as you can imagine, that would be challenging. But the good news is that everybody will talk. Of course, for the same reason that there are very many people on my right-hand side here, I'm not going to present them one by one. Their name and institution will appear on the screen in a few minutes, and you will see who they are and where they come from. For the same reason, again, there will not be questions after every presentation, but there will be a chance with about half an hour at the end of the session to ask the different people whatever you want to ask them. So please, prepare your questions, make sure you check to whom you want to ask your question, and those questions will be possible to be put forward at the end of the many presentations. I would like to once again thank Alison, who has helped me putting the PowerPoint together, and to Melanie, who has accepted to be the rapporteur of the session. So having said that, the first speaker is Bianca Dendena. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Emmanuel, for the introduction, and thank all of you for being here. So my name is Bianca Dendena, and I work as a consultant for FAO. The aim of this very brief talk is to guide you to explore a couple of knowledge products we as FAO have been working throughout the year, and most of all, I would like you to focus your attention on how they are connected to one another. So the first one basically is the policy brief, which is on enabling environment, to create an enabling environment for rural advisory services. And I'm sure that all of us are more or less quite familiar with the concept of rural advisory services. What I would like to catch your attention on today is that the acknowledgement of their role in supporting farmers is increasing in the global agenda. And there is a lot of discussion on how to support them in, unlocking their potential to support farmers. Notwithstanding this visibility, rural advisory services are facing a number of challenges. This is just, a sample of the broad range of services they provide to farmers. So notwithstanding the visibility they are getting on global agenda, as I said, rural advisory services basically still face a number of challenges that hamper their potential in doing their work in support to farmers. And these are, again, this is just a sample of all these challenges. The problem is that these challenges affect significantly the functions they can provide, both at the individual level, at the organizational level, and in, impacting on the environment where they work. I'm not going into details on that, but I'd rather invite you on to look at the policy brief we developed, because this is where FAO came in, and this is our work basically, because we involved an expert that developed in collaboration with us this policy brief I told you about. Okay, that was aimed to, to map all these challenges with a clear aim of identifying solutions to overcome them, to identify solutions to unlock rural advisory services potential. And we did so by focusing our attention and working in the nexus of communication, dissemination, and policy design activities. So one of the key actions that we identified to support rural advisory services was to support research on CSA initiative in order to provide rural advisory services with evidence to share with farmers to scale up relevant and locally adapted practices. And that's where our second work I would like to talk to you about during this talk came in. And this is the review we have been developing with a number of experts in in many research centers around the world, focusing on collecting case studies about index-based insurance. The case studies we collected are focused on a number of countries, and there you can see a list. And what we did basically was to collect already available knowledge that is scattered around so many research centers, and I would say locked in many experts, to have first a living, I would say, systematization of knowledge on index-based insurance tools that are quite promising in terms of risk transfer for farmers. And so these are our lessons learned, and it's a quite long list. And I think the most important point to share with you today is that, according to our experience, we can say that much knowledge is indeed already available somewhere, and what we really need to do and to focus on is to collect it, to gather it, to systematize and to understand it, and in order for it to be made available to like rural advisory services, but to any other practitioner that works with farmers and support them in facing a changing climate. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
So remember, it's time now to take her name and write down any question you may have for her. The next speaker is Danush Dinesh.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And just to flag, this is not a presentation from myself alone. It's also with Ilaria Fermian, who's in the audience from IFAD. This was proposed as a joint presentation between CCAFS, the CGR Research Program on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, and IFAD. And it builds on joint work which we've done together. So we've done this report. It's called the Nutrition Advantage Report. And there are copies outside. And I would encourage you to grab some of these copies if you're interested in this presentation and topic. So really what we want to bring out of this short slot is the interlinkages between climate change issues, nutrition issues, and gender issues. And drawing on this report and other work which IFAD and CCAFS has done, I would just like to bring out some key messages here. So the first thing is, really understanding what the linkages are. So when we look at climate change, we see, it impacts the nutritional status in different parts of the world. It is also affected, climate change is affected by dietary choices. And you also see that climate change has impact on gender, differential vulnerabilities between men and women, for example. And then you look at gender, and you see there are positive association between increasing women's empowerment and improved nutrition outcomes. And then also how critical it is to address gender-specific needs, preferences, and constraints in climate and nutrition interventions. So I don't want to go into it in more detail, but what this slide, the take-home message is, these three issues are highly interrelated, and appreciating those linkages and programming efforts to achieve maximum co-benefits across all these issues is beneficial for climate-smart agriculture programming. And this slide, it's just, I was sitting in the audience and it's not very visible if you're in the back. But really what this tries to show is that to achieve nutrition and climate resilient agriculture, we need to take a perspective which is gender and social equity perspective, and looking at different dimensions, looking right from the livelihood assets, institutions, food system activities and outcomes. So there are some existing frameworks within which such joint programming can be done. So now really the exciting thing about this report, and I would really promote it to you again here, is that we've looked into some of the case studies of IFAD's Adaptation for Smallholders in Agriculture Program investments. I'll just go through two of them very quickly here. And then we've looked at how these adaptation investments primarily are also delivering returns for gender and nutrition. So this project in Mauritania, the PRODEFI project, the primary climate change related intervention is increasing access to water, energy, and sustainable animal fodder management. But what we discover is that this is also having very positive impacts on gender issues. So the project is lifting constraints on the economic activities of women and increasing their productive capital. So that was one of the findings. It's strengthening women's production and post-production capacity. So there is that angle as well, which is being generated from an adaptation intervention. And the project has a focus on promoting women's leadership. But looking at the nutrition dimension, the project is also promoting appropriate nutritional practices, which has a nutrition impact and outcome as well. And it has generated greater availability and accessibility of products like goat milk, baobab fruit, apiculture products, and these improve household and community level nutrition. So you can see how practically an adaptation intervention is delivering benefits for nutrition and gender as well, in addition to climate benefits. I have one more minute, so I'm just going to skip this. So there are a few more examples in the report, so please do refer to them. So just capturing some of the lessons which come out from ASAP investments. So there is this opportunity to maximize co-benefits for nutrition and gender from adaptation investments. That's also applicable to broader CSA investments. But we are already struggling with capacity to design CSA projects and the three different pillars and so on. But we need much more capacity in terms of gender and nutrition as well. For project design. The other aspect is the knowledge base. There needs to be much more collaborative research from the climate change, agriculture, and nutrition communities in order to address the knowledge gaps that exist. And this could be an area of focus for the Knowledge Action Group here. And then we are also struggling with this whole issue of indicators to measure CSA progress, and that the Knowledge Action Group has made some progress on that. But if we want to do more integrated programming, we need to also capture these other dimensions as well. Yeah, and then going beyond tick box from gender disaggregation or accessibility to looking at economic empowerment. So that's also one of the big issues that we would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Danush. Our next speaker is Daniel Eisman from Cornell University.
Good afternoon. So, as Emmanuel said, I'm from Cornell's Institute for Climate Smart Solutions, and I help run the Climate Smart Farming program. Just to give you a little bit of background, GACSA was formed in 2013, and we work with over 150 scientists at Cornell University that are all working on climate change. Our Climate Smart Farming program was launched in 2015, and we really focus a lot on working with small farmers. Out of the 36,000 farms in New York State alone, there are roughly 32,000 small farmers earning an income of less than $350,000 a year. And so our core mission is to really work towards building resilient, sustainable agriculture within the Northeast and New York State. And we look a lot at the social, cultural, and economic systems that are impacting small farmers in the Northeast. GACSA has also developed the first climate smart farming extension team within the United States. One of the unique problems that we have found within New York State and the Northeast is that we are characterized by a really diverse range of agricultural products and practices. So that has been a huge problem for us to overcome, and that leads a lot of our research to focus on what are the specific agricultural needs for these small farmers. And based on our research and based on talking to small farmers within the region, working with extension specialists, and working with the climate scientists at Cornell, we've been able to develop a toolkit for adaptation and mitigation practices. And this is something that we're continually doing. And we focus on a range of agricultural practices, such as dairy and livestock, vegetables and field crops, tree fruit, berries, grapes, and maple syrup. And just to give you an idea of the tools that we've developed and our website, so our climatesmartfarming.org website offers 5 tools that we have developed since 2015. The range of our tools covers a growing degree day calculator, a grape hardiness and apple freeze risk tool, an irrigation scheduler, and our newest tool is a cover crop scheduler for winter crops. In addition to the decision tools that we've developed, we also wanted to provide a forum or a space for farmers to connect and learn from each other. So we've developed a series of videos where we've interviewed farmers and extension specialists within the region to discuss some of the impacts that they have seen over the past few years. As I'm sure many of you can relate to, that it's been difficult to get farmers to even discuss the topic of climate change, and especially in the US where it's become highly politicized. So to have these videos where you see farmers talking about some of the struggles that they've had over the past few years has really helped to share stories. And this slide shows just our Climate Smart Farming Extension team. So we have a team of, well, we're now up to 6 regional experts that focus on dairy management, field crops and soil health, small fruits, vegetables, and integrated pest management, and also viticulture. This gives you an example of the output of one of our online tools. So this is our water deficit calculator. So it will calculate if and when your plants will experience stress based on the type of crop that you have. So farmers or extension experts can visit our website, enter in their location, the type of soil that they have, and the type of crop that they have, whether or not they've irrigated. And then the graph will show if and when the plants will experience stress. And just to give an overview of some of the key lessons that we've learned so far through our program is that we really need to get to know our farmers well and find out what their needs are. And that's been one of the biggest benefits for us because we've been able to go out and actually speak to farmers, go out to farms and talk to them about some of the needs that they have and the tools that they would like to see. We've also had a challenge in terms of framing the conversations about climate change. The language is changing, especially in the United States. We have to talk about resiliency now instead of climate change. And we also need to focus a lot on training extension specialists and advisors who go out and interact with farmers more locally. And then another lesson is that there's been a lot of interest in the tools that we've developed, and so we would really like to see these tools transferred to other countries, to other locations, which takes us to our next lesson learned is that it's very difficult to find long-term stable funding, and as I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I hope the flow of topics keep you awake after lunch. Actually, I think it's a good way. The next speaker is Caroline Muller from AgMIP.
Hi, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's great to see you all awake. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some information about a tool that we've developed. But first, I just want to comment on a few things that we've heard kind of coming into this. And I think one of the things is that we need to move a little bit beyond dialogue when we're talking about the intersection between science and policy. AgMIP is an organization that works with models, but in addition to multiple models, we're trying to work with the policymakers to bring their aspirations in agriculture pathways into the models and test them for their resilience going forward. And I think we think about the climate a lot about what's happened historically and what we're doing now, but we need to pay a little bit more attention to our thinking for the future and really testing whether or not the innovations we're introducing now are resilient and over what time scale and together with what other sectors are trying to do, because it's not just agriculture that the climate smart aspect has to pertain to. It has to be smart across the system. So I'll focus on a tool that we've developed. It's called the Impacts Explorer, and I'm just going to move right ahead. The motivation of the Impacts Explorer is to, having done research involving decision makers and policy makers, we want to make it accessible, discoverable, discussable, and so this is a tool that tries to visualize how agriculture will be shaped by changes in climate, socioeconomic development, and adaptation situations. And as I mentioned, the methodology has been developed together with stakeholders. It's benefited tremendously from the efforts of many of the people, if not most, in this room, with policy dialogues or scenario discussions similar to what CCAFS has done, and in some cases, CCAFS scientists working with us to engage the policy environment from which we code pathways to bring into the model to test for the future. So I'm going to showcase a few findings here. What you see in the upper, let's see, I guess it's the same for you as me. The upper left corner is just a snapshot of the tool as it would appear on, as you would open the website. Below that, you see the pins on the map that are some of the locations in which we have worked. And at this point, I'd like to say that none of this would be possible without tremendous effort by over 100 scientists working in teams in these regions, in their institutions. So we're very honored with their effort and our ability to showcase it today. This is an example of results from Punjab, Pakistan. What you can see on the right-hand side is basically the local map of the regions. I can't provide you a walkthrough right now because we're in adequate time. I have a handout that gives a little guided tour that you can step through, and we also have a video that we'll be posting later today as we're launching the beta version of this product in AGU in America as well. I think the take-home messages for the overview on this one, there's a little description of the farm, the system, the climate that's been modeled. And the big thing that you can see there is cotton doesn't look too good for a future that has a lot of climate warming associated with it. And that adaptation can help. If you look at these other tabs that are shown here, they'll give you other views of how to look at the data, and I'm just going to open them all at once so that you can see, and I know people in the back cannot see this, so I apologize, but the main points here, the green shows a pathway in which the policymakers thought about resilience and sustainability as sort of key factors. The orange is sort of business as usual and more fossil fuel oriented. So in general, what you can see is that the green bars are generally to the right of the orange bars in almost every observation which you can find on these graphs. And what that means is that sustainability is actually good for business, that you actually do better with your yields and with your adaptation and your reductions of vulnerability by considering sustainability pathways. So I think that's an important take-home. If you need more information in the tool, there's a read more. It takes you to a written document form of web pages that you can scroll through using the buttons that are tied to the different icons of what is vulnerability, what is climate impact on these things. And if you want to look in detail at what these charts mean, you can go to a data viewer, which is the little box on the lower right-hand side. And it will allow you to choose the different parameters, whether or not an adaptation was invoked and what happened to the system. So I think this is the summary slide. This is, we provide both quantitative and qualitative inputs to inform agriculture system policy planning and investment decisions. I think it's really important to provide quantitative information because sometimes the message is that it's not enough and that more transformative thinking or systems or collaboration is needed. In fact, that is often to be the case. I think the tool features methods that are, that are interesting and explorable, and that's, really the intent is to foster a dialogue that really starts to look more toward the future and take what we know from the present, but also consider the things we haven't done yet. So that's all I have time for. Thank you very much. I'm around for the next few days and happy to talk to anyone. Thank you.
The next speaker is Emmanuel Torquebio. I can call him. Oh, sorry, he's already here. Sorry. I told you I have a few tricks to keep you awake. I apologize. I happen to be both the moderator and one of the speakers. So I'm going to spend those few minutes talking about a subject we have been developed at CIRAD with partners from IRD, INRA, the CGIAR, and the Ohio State University on soil carbon, and trying to convince you that soil carbon is a powerful CSA wedge. As you know, if we look at carbon exchanges between ecosystems and the atmosphere, there are two major sources of greenhouse gases, which are land degradation and fossil fuel uses. Those are the two arrows going upwards. And two major sinks, which are the ocean on the right-hand side and land use on the left-hand side, which has, with 2.6 gigatons of carbon per year, is the difference between photosynthesis and respiration. This averages to 4.3 gigatons of carbon per year increase in the atmosphere and is our climate change problem that we all know. Now, if we are able to increase the land sink by 3.4 gigatons per year, and if we are able to cancel the land degradation source of greenhouse gases, then we should be able to increase the amount of soil, of carbon into the soil of 4 per thousand per year. Where does this 4 per thousand per year come from? It comes from the ratio between 3.4, the additional carbon going into the soil, over 860, which is on the left-hand side of the picture in yellow, the amount of existing soil carbon in the 0 to 30 centimeter soil layer. This has been coined by the group of institutions I mentioned at the beginning as the 4 per thousand or 4 per mil initiative, and its objective is to increase the carbon soil content of 4 per mil or 0.4% per year. And if we are able to do that, we should be able to offset the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is actually possible. We have here a few data from CIRAD sites across Africa showing that amounts of around 5 to 10, even to 15 or 20 per mil per year are possible in CSA approaches such as using compost or agroforestry. Actually, there are many other CSA agroecological practices which can contribute to soil carbon sequestration. No tillage is well known for all of us. Water management is another one, increasing water capture. Organic fertilizers, ecological intensification, broadly speaking, improved rangeland management, mixed cropping and agroforestry are all CSA practices which have been discussed within GACSA and which actually can reach carbon sequestration rate of 4 per thousand per year or more. In summary, what I wanted to say here is that soil carbon sequestration by agroecological practices contributes to both mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. So there is a convergence between CSA and those agroecological practices I've been mentioning. Second, the objectives of CSA can thus be reached through increased soil carbon sequestration. Actually, soil carbon sequestration under the 4 per mil initiative is a sort of sub-component of climate-smart agriculture. Third, soil carbon sequestration in agriculture and forestry is a soft solution for carbon capture and storage and to offset annual CO2 fluxes into the atmosphere. Thank you. Our next speaker is Matthew Reddy.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Good afternoon, everybody. Matthew Reddy, the Director for Climate Smart Agriculture with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. This is a summary presentation of a workshop that we held here in June earlier this year. It was a collaboration between the knowledge enabling and investment action groups. Quick show of hands, who was here for that session in June? It was a terrific session. Yeah. Okay, so I can't lie about it. I have to tell the truth about the session because we have witnesses here. So, an excellent session. And the idea of the session was to look at CSA metrics and the rationale, and I think Bernard summed it up quite eloquently this morning, where he said, without measurement there's no action. And this is the sort of rationale behind why we need to better define and work towards a cohesive set of CSA metrics. There is a set of minutes that's available from the meeting if people would like further detail. So the questions that we addressed, primarily, how are CSA metrics considered? And we had a regional approach, so Marwan was also there. I'd also like to recognise Varun Vats of Syngenta, Elisa De Stefano of IFAD, Ernie Shea, who ran one of the working groups, Yannick Fiedler of FAO, who looked at responsible agricultural investment principles. Emmanuel was here, Jim Stevenson from PwC, Amy Heyman from FAO Sustainable Ag, Ada Ignatiuk from EPIC, and Danush. So they were the people that presented and took part in the overall group. And another key point was, what's the process for harmonisation of metrics, and do perhaps some of our regional processes facilitate harmonisation? And CCAF's Danush was able to show that at the time there were something like 378 different indicators as part of CSA metrics. And of course that diversity is at one point encouraging, but 378 indicators is a real challenge to manage. And how might we go about boiling those down to some key concepts and some key indicators? I'll make the point that we looked at through the session the different pillars and the indicators under each pillar. Indicators to measure food systems and productivity. Obviously we have very good and well accepted productivity measurements. Conceptually sound indicators for greenhouse gas mitigation, and obviously those indicators that can be used for measurement to UNFCCC standards. But it was in Pillar 2, it was in adaptation and in resilience that we really found the challenges. And I think this is a real area that we could collectively focus on, was the need to focus on this Pillar 2. 378 different indicators. So from the session we then said, well, how might we use the regions to do that? And we said, well, what are some of the principles that we need? What are the findings? Open data. So we need to have data openness. Syngenta shared the fact that they have complete open data right down to the farm scale, and they use an open data program to share that. We proposed to have regional meetings. I know this is going to be a discussion over the next couple of days, but perhaps to think about regionally relevant metrics might be a way to condense that. Resilience-specific metrics. So I'll always remember the work that Tony Simons of ICRAF, who's not here today, but Tony says, if I was a cardiologist, I could probably have 200 measurements for cardiovascular disease, but really all I need to know is, do you smoke, are you overweight, and do you have a family history of cardiovascular disease? And they can boil it down to 3. So somehow we need to come to that sort of refined or harmonised set for resilience. Some of those may well be soil carbon, as Emmanuel explained, organic soil carbon content. It might be farm income, but that could be the work of a regional program. Technology. I see a lot of presentations with drones flying around in farm landscapes. Every second session I have is on bitcoins and blockchain. So how do we think about that more broadly? And then in conclusion, do we try to create an Uber framework? That was one of the key questions. And so the outputs are compilation of approaches, plans for UNFCCC COPs, we'll discuss those, and the regional meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Our next speaker is Julianne Chet Schnetzer from FAO.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Emmanuel, for the introduction. So my name is Julianne Schnetzer. I work at FAO as a Natural Resources Officer, and I would like to present to you the Compendium on Climate-Smart Irrigation. The main credit for this compendium goes actually not to myself, but to Charles Batchelor, who is the lead author of the compendium, and of course also to all the organizations that contributed case studies. You can see their logos on the cover of the compendium. So why did we write this compendium on climate-smart irrigation? From the initial surveys of the Knowledge Action Group in determining what are actually the knowledge gaps, so what do we need to know, what is most requested among CSA practitioners, was water management, knowledge on water management for climate-smart agriculture. So with irrigated agriculture being one of the biggest water consumer globally, it was the obvious choice to focus, including among other efforts, on irrigation. So the purpose of this compendium is to provide a solid basis of evidence on irrigation and also guidance for the planning and design of irrigation systems in order to follow really a climate-smart agriculture approach for irrigation. The structure of the compendium on CSI, climate-smart irrigation, it starts out with trying to define what is actually climate-smart irrigation, which is a definition derived from the 3 pillars of climate-smart agriculture. The compendium further identifies the challenges related to climate change, but also general challenges of irrigated agriculture and the irrigation sector. And it then comes to the core part, which is the identification of the elements that you actually are needed to build climate-smart irrigation systems. And this is structured in 3 parts according to the pillars of climate-smart agriculture. So the first pillar on productivity and incomes, the second pillar on resilience and climate change adaptation, and the third pillar on climate change mitigation. And within each of these sections, you will find a breakdown into the different scales and levels that are relevant in irrigation. So we have what may look like a sprouting potato is actually a river basin. So you can see that we have the river basin scale or the national institutional level, the irrigation scheme scale or the district institutional level, and the field scale and local institutional level with the various elements that are important at these different scales. So this is the basic structure, and at the end we have the case studies. One of the main findings of the compendium is that actually good irrigation practices do a lot to achieve what we want to, what we are aiming at under the first pillar of climate-smart agriculture, and not only, but even more. So you can also have co-benefits for adaptation, resilience, and climate change mitigation. But the important thing we found is that it is really crucial to start from the good irrigation practices to have productive systems that are interesting for stakeholders, that will provide the basis for the success of targeted adaptation and mitigation measures that are being built upon a well-working and efficient irrigation system. Some more key messages from the compendium are that irrigation software is just as important as the hardware. So it's not just about using the right technology, but you need the farmer who really knows how to use it. You need the incentives, you need the right policies at the different levels and scales that I mentioned. Also, the performance of irrigation systems is a function not only of the method, but the farmers. So capacity building is really key here. And also the interlinkages between these scales are very important. It is important to have to allow for an approach that has incremental improvements. So you cannot reach the aim in one step. So that's I will conclude with this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Julianne. Our next speaker is Alex de Pinto.
Thank you. The objective of my talk is to reiterate the idea that if we want climate-smart agriculture to be transformative, we have to think beyond just production. We have to think beyond the field level. Let me give you some examples. In carbon-rich environments, like forests in the DRC, agriculture poses a threat only insofar it actually causes deforestation. There is literature about that. If you think about some work that we have done in Colombia, the solutions that actually turn the best return in terms of economic growth and also reduction in greenhouse gas emissions are not in crop production, but actually in livestock vis-a-vis forests. And so intervening on the productivity of pasture land, but also on the institutions that actually regulate the allocation of land. And when even climate-smart agriculture is interpreted reductively as just as a list of practices from which to choose, some recent work we have done, it shows that it only offers very minimal results in terms of reduction of emissions. Best case scenario, this is indeed considering only maize, rice, and wheat, but best case scenario, if everybody were to adopt it, would only be, there will only be a reduction of 10% of that sort of 1 gigaton threshold of reduction per year that should come from agriculture. So it's not enough. So the thinking, our thinking must go beyond just production. The thinking must include system thinking, so interaction with agricultural land, carbon-rich environments, include agroforestry, crop, livestock, and silvopastoral systems. We have to think about post-harvest and off-farm losses, and about the value chains and food production consumption system, and think about the role of trade. We also must recognize there are multiple pathways through which nutrition, health, and gender influence the set of available responses. So the importance of nutrition, for instance, and the importance of gender. And decision makers need to have tools to evaluate all these options. There are tremendous forces at play here. There are global, national, and local. We have to somehow negotiate among those forces. And we have to keep in mind that whatever solutions we find, these solutions have to be economically and politically sustainable. I don't have to remind you what happens when things are not politically sustainable. Look at the United States, right? And so in this, with these ideas, the AgMIP and its sort of latest efforts, latest development, has developed a larger framework to evaluate several dimensions very similar to climate-smart agriculture. And in particular, I want to point out the inclusion of food security, that at this point is not just calorie output, but it's really the nutritional value of what we are producing. Recent development in the use of data, recent development in the use of model is allowing us to go across the scales, to go from global to regional, and all the way actually to more localized evaluations. And also, it gives us the opportunity to analyze the effect of extreme events. And so incorporating risk and evaluating contingency analysis. So we have to keep in mind that to meet the goals of our recent treaties, the agreements and our frameworks must be as inclusive as possible. We have at this point, we have the tools that can offer solution to multiple constituents. We can talk about costs and returns to ministries, which I think are extremely important to actually formulate policies. We can provide plausible scenarios for contingency planning for the private industry. We also can provide plausible scenarios to international organizations to identify future intervention and threats. And most of all, I think that these tools can facilitate the dialogue across ministries that favor a very much needed coherence across policies. It can't be just agriculture. It's agriculture and other sectors. The multidimensional challenges we're facing require policy coherence, something that is missing. If you work with many governments, you see that is really not what we're dealing with. And these tools are here. They're available. Just we have to make sure that researchers can work with implementers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. You still with us? Are you still with us? Yes. Good. I'm hearing you. Now, believe it or not, we're on time. Only 3 more to go. The next speaker is Lida Mercado.
Okay. Hello. I'm going to take you so you wake up to Central America. Central America is the tropical region where the biggest changes on climate are expected. It will become drier because it's going to get less rain and temperatures will increase. They will experiment longer, drier seasons. Farmers, especially smallholders, are facing many problems, and especially reductions in their crop system, productivity, suitability, and resilience. The region is also affected by extreme climate events, and especially the southern oscillation, ENSO. That hit the region between 2014 and 2016. It was one of the worst drought that the region experimented. Losses for smallholder production was around 70%, and millions of people were left in food insecurity. So it's clear there is a need to reorient the way how agriculture is done in this region. And the Ministries of Agriculture, by the end of 2015, decided to use the climate-smart agriculture approach as a way to face these problems. And in fact, during the Global Landscape Forum in Paris in 2015, they launched a declaration saying that they they plan to use the climate-smart agriculture approach to work in the future. Between 2016 and 2017, in a very participatory process, the governments and many stakeholders formulated the climate-smart agriculture strategy for the Central American region. I am not going to talk about the strategy now because tomorrow there's going to be a presentation about the strategy. But I would like to say that what were the success, the factor for success on formulating and passing this strategy that involved more than 6 countries. One of them was high-level political support, and second, also technical support for the institutions that you can see there. All these institutions provided technical support for the development of the strategy, plus a very wide participatory process. What are the challenges? We need to operationalize this strategy, and this is planned to be done next year, and we hope that we can count with GACSA support. And also, I think this is an experience that could be replicated in other regions. We are going to have some handouts with a summary of the strategy, and we can talk about that. One nice thing about this strategy is that it presents a framework for the work that many institutions, research, governments, NGOs, does done in the region on climate-smart agriculture. So I will talk about this. I already said that. So I am going to talk a little bit about what CATIE, the institution I come from, which is a research, education, and extension institution, provides in the case of climate-smart agriculture. You can see all the pillars of what we do in climate-smart agriculture, and I'm not going to go into detail into that because I have a handout that can give to you. So I'm going to present some examples. The first example I want to talk is the Mesoamerican Agroenvironmental Program. This was a platform for research and development that we implemented between 2013 and 2017 with support of the Norwegian government. Using farmer-free schools, we trained a large number of peoples, including women and youth. And we promoted 68 agroecological and agroforestry practices that has been developed for many years for experimentation and testing by CATIE and his partners. We evaluated these practices from the climate-smart agriculture approach, and we found some of the challenges that the previous, one of the presenters talked about the indicators. We evaluated these practices and we found that they were climate-smart, that were providing inputs or improving production, adaptation, and mitigation. And you can see the outputs. We found that these families increased the diversity of their diet. In 73, they have, for example, they consume 2.8 vegetables. By the end of by the middle of 2016, they were eating more than double. And the other interesting thing is that most of this food came from their farms and home gardens. So, what were the success for these experiences? One, we take into account the needs of the farmers through the farmer-field schools. Also, we include women and youth. And third, we use innovation that has been tested in different times, and they were adapted to the condition of the region. I have 2 more slides, but I don't have time. But I want to talk, I would say that coffee is one of the main crops that we work with. We have developed a tool that is called Coffee Cloud that the farmers can use in their smartphone, and they can find information about climate, about weather, and they also can follow up or monitor the rust infections in their crops. Thank you.
Thank you, Lida. The next speaker is Maria Rosa Mosquera Lozada.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to make this presentation. I'm going to speak about AFINET, which is the Agroforest Innovation Network funded by the European Commission. I'm the leader coordinator of this European project, which is a thematic network that has a budget of 2 million euros, and it started on this year. So I'm going to present how the project looks like and the first initial results. The project is composed by 12 partners from 9 countries and 1 NGO, which is the EURAF. EURAF is the European Agroforestry Federation, which is a federation of national associations of 20 countries all over Europe. The main subject of the thematic innovation network that has as acronym AFINET, Agroforestry Innovation Network, is to promote smart climate agriculture through the promotion of agroforestry practices in Europe. This is a clear objective which we consider that has a huge innovation potential, because after being evaluated what is the extent of agroforestry systems in Europe, we discovered that it's used in less than 1% of the agricultural land use. For this reason, it has a huge potential. The way of working within the AFINET will be done with 9 regional agroforestry innovation networks, each which is represented in this map by each a spot, a blue spot, that are placed in Spain, United Kingdom, Belgium, Portugal, Poland, Hungary, Italy, France, and Finland. Each regional innovation network is composed by around 40 people, which are the stakeholders. That group should have more than 40% of their composition on farmers, but also policymakers are incorporated, NGOs, multipliers, farmers associations, etc. So it's based on a multi-actor approach. These RAINs, or regional agroforestry innovation networks, have connections within them, but also we will establish connection between different RAINs, and also with the global society and policy makers. This defines the 3-level interaction. What we are going to do in this, they will meet during the last 3 years, and we will meet with this, within these RAINs every 6 months. And there, the idea is to promote the knowledge and experience exchange about agroforestry. You have very good examples, but they are not too many. The development of new ideas, identify knowledge gaps that has been done already, as I will show you later on. To evaluate ideas and results close to be put in practices, not recognized yet by the final user, and to promote coordination in order to motivate and inspire those involved in the different RAINs. We have had the first meeting last September in these 9 regions, as I mentioned, and we just discussed with all these kind of actors and stakeholders in each RAIN, and the main conclusions that are the main gaps that we have found after this discussion all over as a summary of the 9 regions are related with policy and administration, technical aspects, communication and dissemination, and also economic aspects and chain development. Regarding the policy and administration, many farmers say that they need a better policy support for agroforestry. There are some identified problems mainly related with the common agricultural policy that seems that are going to be solved, but are they still there, and they are complaining, and farmers are complaining about that. And also the problem related with the uncertainty of having tree plantations in agricultural lands. Regarding technical aspects, they have a lot of doubts about how to combine the different components of agroforestry. Also, they think that the products that are delivered from these agroforestry practices should be linked to the land use. So we have to work with public awareness, consumer awareness, and also farmer awareness. And of course, they are quite interested in knowing how these new type of systems can affect the money they can obtain. Well, after these meetings, besides these meetings, we are going to create the knowledge cloud, which is a cloud that is in a website that will synthesize already existing knowledge from different sources, including the traditional knowledge, and integration of everything in a unique repository. Is that the repository will have a lot of information. We will, of course, disseminate it in different ways. We are just starting. If you can just make to me questions or go to the AFINET website if you need more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosa. And our last speaker is Elizabeth Cementum from ECRAF.
Thank you. So I will talk a little bit about how we can help farmers reduce crop failures, improve environmental conditions, and also support extension workers to implement CSA on the ground. As you know, where CG is working is basically in very diverse environments where smallholder farmers often don't grow just one crop, but they have many. We have cases where there is no internet, up to fully covered internet every day of the year. Farmers who have no phones, smartphones, or the old Nokia-style phone. Farmers who may be illiterate and bilingual. So this is the situation where we are starting from, and I would like to share some work that we have been testing in Southeast Asia and developed further with the GACSA team here, with Bianca and Federica. It's a checklist for extension workers to sort of keep track of forecast, crop advice, and their observations from the field. So I would like to just mention that this is for the extension workers to prepare in the office in order to be able to develop agro-advisories on the ground. It helps, so this is the final product. That could be an example of a final product that goes as a bulletin to farmers. It's a seasonal forecast. And what we want to do with this tool is to help the extension workers to organize and document weather, crop, and advisory information, incorporate also farmers' knowledge, prepare these bulletins or agro-advisories, and also to implement CSA on the ground and be able to share good practices. It consists of a checklist. So far it's only available in an Excel sheet. It's a template form with instructions and examples. It has 3 components. One is the seasonal forecast, one is a section on the cropping requirement, and one is the advisory form. And there is also a guideline coming together with this, with more in-depth instructions. It's also telling extension workers how to prepare village meetings and how to develop these agro-advisories. So quickly, I will just show I know you cannot read what it says here, but it's the Excel format as it is. The top version has a reference to the past climate, and in our case, the farmers prefer to be reminded about what the weather was last year for 1 month. So this is prepared for 12 months in a row, and you just select the time period that you have your crops growing for. And then you would have fill in the forecast for this particular period. It could be temperature, whatever is available. Average temperatures is less preferred by farmers rather to minimum and maximum temperatures for the month. And also rainfall, minimum and maximum range. Then, of course, this is the seasonal forecast that gets updated sometime during the season. So that's the second part here. We also have made sure that farmers are going to, or extension workers are going to be supportive to implement integrated farming systems. Most of these agro-advisories that exist on the market today are available for only one crop, typically cash crops or rice, staple crops rather. So this middle section is for the crop requirements, and that could be, for example, what minimum water is available or is needed to get started. That section is static, it doesn't change. The last section, the third part at the bottom here, is the advisory. So it allows for the extension worker to keep track of local knowledge. It has a plan A, which is based on the seasonal forecast that is the most probable. And you have a plan B. So what if the rain doesn't come when it was forecasted? What do you do then? Or what happens if the crops are failed and is there still time to grow another crop? Or what could be the actions to take? The extension worker would then take notes during the visit, both from him or herself and also what the farmers have noticed during this time. It's keeping also track of the targets. So at the beginning of the season, there is an idea here that we set targets according to the CSA targets, what the farmers are intending to do this season, and then you will evaluate them as you go through the meetings during the season. Also notes for self for the next visit. So far, we have only tested this in very small scale in Southeast Asia. We're still discussing how we could use this, make it more useful for others, how it could be translated, and how extension workers could actually use this to exchange information with each other. What we have seen so far is that this has enabled meteorologists who are often unaware of what forecast indicators that farmers need. When they come together with extension workers and farmers in one room, they are able to come up with the indicators that are the most needed ones for farmers and what time they are there, when they are supposed to be there. It's also a support tool we have seen here for designing these agro-advisories that comes as bulletins. And we have tested this, and we know there are differences between where you live, where gender, women and men have different preferences of indicators, for example. Of course, the literacy rates depend also that on what you can do with the extension advisories. And as I said, this is a work in progress, and we're very happy to get feedback on what could be implemented and what is the least necessary or most necessary to start with. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Isn't it amazing the amount of new knowledge that this strange concept of climate-smart agriculture can generate? I think that those panelists, even before we ask the questions, deserve a big clap. All right, thank you. So now we have some time for questions. So please try to focus your questions, if you can, on those items which appear on these slides, and please let us know to whom is the question intended to. All right, here I have one hand.
I have 3 quick questions for...
No, 3 questions? Quick, eh?
For Elizabeth, for the agro-advisories, where is the data?
Okay, microphone, sorry.
For Elizabeth, for the agro-advisories, where is the data coming from? For Carolyn, what countries are included in the Impacts Explorer? And for Alex, how are you translating the regional assessments into policy recommendations?
All right, have you noted the questions, the 3 people? Good, let's take another one. Yes, the gentleman here.
Thank you. I've got 3 quick questions as well. The first one is directed to Daniel. She spoke about the climate-smart farming decision tools. But we have in mind at the back of, we should have this at the back of our minds. There are some people rooted in the rural areas who cannot access this type of technology. What options do we have for these, to assist these people? Because sometimes online, well, it's suited for those who are actually in towns. But for those farmers who are actually rooted in rural areas, they won't be able to access that. Then the second issue, the question is directed to the moderator, Mr. Emmanuel. You spoke of the 4 per thousand soils for food security and what. I think, if my memory serves well, it was launched way back last year in Morocco. But as of now, we didn't get even communication with regards to that. Then the other issue is a cause of concern. Allow me to say this. I'm realizing a gap of, to do with the non-involvement of the African academic institutions. Because as far as I'm concerned, anything without us sometimes, I think in the last workshop or meeting that we had, we actually called upon for the involvement of the African academic institutions so that they present on the real issues on the ground. And as long as we don't involve them, then it's as good as we are not, doing anything. So I kindly ask you to really also involve the African academic institutions so that they can present on issues real on the ground, because there is a lot that is happening on the ground. But we are not getting that information. Thank you. And also the last part, the last issue, all right, the last one is I'm looking at the composition of the presenters, because last time we also said we need the farmers to be there to present on their issues. But as far as I'm concerned, if I'm to ask how many farmers are being represented here, I think we really need to be serious if we are to really make serious progress with regards to climate smart agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. There are many questions in one. Okay, let's take a third one. I've seen a hand at the back there.
Yeah, Caroline, you say sustainability is good for business. In fact, business is part of the sustainability. The problem is if for our perspective is based on short term. How can we stimulate a long-term perspective in terms of business?
All right, that was for Caroline. All right, let's try to have the answer to this first series of questions. Frankly, I've not been able to note all the questions one by one. Can we start with the question asked by Alison? There were 3 short questions. Can you, the 3 of you, okay, Alex, can you start?
So the risk of being perceived as armchair economists or modelers is too high to come up with policy recommendations directly from, say, Washington, D.C., or whatever university. So generally what works is to work directly with policymakers and explore scenarios, rather, based on their knowledge of what policies are pursuable in that particular country. And then from those kind of scenarios, you can select some policies that are viable for that particular country.
Okay, next answer for Alison was from Caroline.
Maybe I can answer all of my questions. So the countries that are involved in Impacts Explorer are Pakistan, India, Senegal, Ghana, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And each of those are teams that's a combination of universities, MET agencies, and NGOs working in that region together with collaborators in US and Europe. So, and then the question having to do with sustainability being good for business, I realized even as I said that it's quite a statement. And I think it leads exactly to the other comment that has been said previously today. It's good for business if there's business market opportunities, and having an intervention that doesn't have a product or a demand pull will not really help. So I guess what I'm saying with that is that if the policies can be made to enhance the market that the adaptation would feed into, then we have outcomes that are good for business. But there is a very big if statement there. So I'll maybe leave it at that for now, unless there's other clarification needed.
Thank you. So now your question, the first one was for...
I have also one question.
Oh, you have one question. Sorry. Can you go, Elizabeth?
Maybe I can respond to both of your questions. So in our case, we work in 3 countries, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and they are very different, these countries. In Vietnam, the data comes from the government, the forecast, but the agricultural advice comes from the extension workers' knowledge. So this is where they will look at their own knowledge bank. When this doesn't exist, which is the case in Cambodia, the total opposite, we use farmers' knowledge, and this is as good as it gets. Often as good as the extension workers' own knowledge or this university knowledge that they often have. We use, in the case that there is no meteorological data from the government, we use apps, whatever is available through your smartphones. So we have something called windy.com, which is an online forecast that you can see updated every day, every second. So this is what we train people. So in response to your question, I will come to it. We train farmer champions or youth union staff, extension staff, whoever is working with farmers at the ground and who has access to internet. So usually somebody outside the village has an access to internet, so they can access this information from there and share it with others. So when we work with the farmers without the internet and who are not able to read and write, this is where it's so important to work together with them to develop the indicators, the graphs, whatever information they need. So we start from their needs. And then the signs of how the sun, whatever is significant for a drought, how you draw a flood or a heavy rainstorm, it depends on what the farmers are able to understand based on on the indicators they see in the sky or on the pictures, how they draw them. So internet is not available for everyone, and we are working in this sort of transition time before everybody has access to internet, because I think that will come maybe not in 5 years, but 10 years.
All right, thank you. Now I'll try to answer your second question, which was about the 4 per thousand initiative and how we have communicated about that and the way African academic institutions have been reached or not reached, rather, as you said. Well, I should probably say that if the information has not reached sufficient academic institutions in Africa, it's probably our fault that we have not communicated sufficiently. However, having said that, I would like to say that, yes, the project is not old. As you said, it was officially launched in Morocco a year ago. And since then, we have been working hard, trying to multiply the effect that we have started to promote. What we are doing now, and you know, this is the way we researchers regularly work, is try to raise money to fund projects. So I have a few good news regarding the 4 per thousand initiative. We have been able, under the leadership of INRA France, to raise money from the European Commission under a project called GACSA, which has as an objective to network worldwide scientists working on the 4 per thousand initiative. And this project just started less than a month ago. So when this project runs full size, there will be much more communication, and hopefully people from all over the world will hear more from the 4 per thousand initiative and will be brought to work together with us. And we have other projects emerging. Another one with the Climate Kick is trying to discuss with different stakeholders, both in Europe and in sub-Saharan Africa, about what are the obstacles for implementing on-the-ground 4 per million activities and drawing an action plan for 4 per mil. And this again will involve stakeholders from different countries. So once again, I'm not saying that all is rosy, and of course we have not moved fast enough probably, as you said, but we are trying to do so. Regarding your next question, which was about the number of farmers present here, I'm afraid I do not have the answer to that. Of course, it is important. Should I ask the facilitation unit or one of the co-chairs to try to answer that question? What about the presence of farmers? Me or Martin, would you have something to say about that? And how have we been able so far within GACSA meetings to mobilize farmers and to have farmers with us? I'm sorry, it's not an easy question, I know, but somebody has to answer that question asked by this gentleman.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, and I guess as well the participant, for the very good question, because that was really something that was highlighted at the last annual forum, and we integrated it into our overall work plan that we have to put farmers at the center. And there are many ways that we've tried to do that, including in each of the work of the action group, asking the questions, is there a way that we can involve farmers as partners, not just as beneficiaries in terms of the knowledge co-creation. When we have as well engagement in events, we always make sure that on the panel we have a farmer, and we go through different, it depends, you know, we have the World Farmers Organization that is an active member that can reach out to its constituency, but we also have regional alliances and other constituencies that can reach out to farmers. So we saw that in the membership growth that we've had since the last annual forum, there's been a big growth in the civil society organization and the farmers organizations. But we need to do better, and for this annual forum we tried to reach out, but given the short time frame and the visa issues, and as well competing events, we were not able to attract as many farmers as we would have liked to. But it's certainly something that we have to devote much more efforts on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mi. Now let's go for another series of questions. Yes, at the back there, at the very back.
Thank you very much. I would like to react on the presentation that has been made on climate smart irrigation. First, I'm really glad to see that irrigation is now on board of such discussions. It's very important. And I would recommend actually to go one step further in the sense that when talking about climate smart agriculture, we are talking about maximizing synergies and minimizing trade-offs. And in that respect, regarding water and irrigation, what is very important is the multiple use of water system and irrigation systems. In that regard, the CGIAR and the International Water Management Institute have developed a few years ago a great work program on called MUSE, on multiple use services. And I would suggest to maybe dig out this work and continue in that direction, the multiple use of irrigation systems for climate smart agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that's not really a question, rather a comment. All right? Okay, just here in front of you, yes.
Yes, my question is for you, Emmanuel. And first of all, I think we're all saying that there's no silver bullet in CSA, but I think your focus on soil carbon is maybe one of the closest things we have to a silver bullet in this world, and there are many interventions that can contribute to that. So my question is, in your presentation, you talked about the evidence for impacts on both mitigation and adaptation from soil carbon, increases in soil carbon. I didn't hear you talk as much about the evidence for the first pillar of CSA, which is productivity. So if you could just say a little more about that, because we are looking, that's obviously essential for the farmers that we're working with.
All right, next question here at the back over there.
Thank you very much. My question is for Elizabeth. Do you have any figure on the agricultural productivity increased by the climate advisories?
You got it?
Yes, yes.
Okay, last question here.
So I think this is...
No, I'm sorry, there was a gentleman just behind you who raised his hand before you. Sorry.
I think we understand the difference between the farming for to live and the fine line of farming for a living. The question is for Elizabeth. Do you add in your advice any marketing advice, what to grow, where to take products, or who might sell those products in your list of advice giving? Thank you.
All right, so the first one was a comment, so I guess you don't need an answer about irrigation, if you don't mind. The next one was for me about whether soil carbon is a silver bullet or not. Well, as you rightly said, there is no silver bullet. And I didn't really talk about the first pillar of CSA when I talked about soil carbon, because it was sort of implied in my analysis of when we are able to improved resilience and adaptation through better soil organic matter content, and at the same time have as a consequence an improved soil carbon sequestration, then contributing to the second pillar, mitigation, then the soil quality improvement, which appears as a consequence of this, as necessarily a consequence in terms of, I wouldn't say like you said, in terms of higher productivity. I would say in terms of sustainable yields and sustainable productivity on the long term, okay? Which is really what we want to achieve with climate smart agriculture. We don't want to increase yield per se, but we want to make sure we increase them in a sustainable manner, which means according to the principle of sustainable development that we all know about. So that, I apologize if I didn't mention that, but that was implied in my analysis of soil carbon potential. All right, I think the next two questions were for Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you are the star for questions. Please try to prepare questions for others.
So very good questions. Thank you so much. In terms of evidence of productivity, what we have seen is we have avoided one cold spell damage on animals due to the existence of a meteorological station in the village. This was very clear. During a cold spell, farmers could monitor the temperature decrease and take action. We have also seen reduced use of pesticides and fertilizers. In terms of changed yield, we haven't seen much evidence yet, but at least they are saving money by avoiding to add fertilizers before rainfall. Marketing advice, we haven't added yet. Farmers are asking for it, and we are going to test, as I understand, in one of our sites this year, to add together with a local, SMS provider. Forget the words now. So that we're going to test this year, but it's not been easy to do this as of yet. We're hoping to. Thank you.
Let's go for the last series of quick questions. There was a man.
Actually, I have a quick comment. I was delighted on Daniela's approach to develop a climate-smart advisory service. And actually, I was shocked to see that in upstate New York, plants are water-stressed for such a long period. And also this comment is pertinent for Caroline's models, because we are working on invasive pest spider mite, which now in Brazil has 38 generations a year. It is the most pesticide-resistant pest, and now in Europe it's moving from 6 generations to 10 generations. When it feeds on water-stressed plants, increases oviposition 3 times. So not only that these plants are going to be water stressed, but they're going to have
can you go for a quick question,
more
please?
pests stress. And these models are as good as our assumptions are. So if we need to do much more basic science before we think that we can solve things with mobile phone applications. And another question for Maria Rosa is, what is gray literature?
All right. Have you taken the questions? Okay, a few more hands. You have talked already, so let's take somebody else at the back there. The lady there, yes. Sorry, I'm giving the chance to different people.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation and tools. So my question is generic for anybody that wants to answer it. How do you make sure that this knowledge is transferred, drilled down, and stay on the ground? Do you have any systematic approach to train the trainers? And with that, I'm questioning, do you approach directly the Farms Association or the local academic to make sure that this knowledge is transferable? Thank you.
All right, Lida will give you an answer. Last question. All right, again over there.
This question is for Danush. Can you give just a very quick answer on how best to treat gender not as an afterthought in terms of CSA planning and reporting and monitoring, that it is not just an added value, but basically very intrinsic in the formulation of the design?
Thank you. So let's go for the answers. So first, there was a series of, there were at least 2 questions, I think, by you. Who is ready? No, it was for some. Caroline, that was part of the first question was for you, I think.
Okay. So thank you very much for the comment of the problems of invasive pests. I would add to that weeds and disease. And it gives me an opportunity to just say a few things that I wasn't able to say in my presentation, that AgMIP actually really works across scales in both spatial dimension and in temporal dimension, but also in the capacity of the models. And one of the things that we've tried to do is create a space for modelers to work collaboratively with their different models, to compare them and see where they fall short. And a huge area of investigation is in the pests and disease. At the recent Paris meeting, there was a number of people that was specializing on pests and disease in particular, a number of people that are very interested in bringing in that aspect. And I completely agree, it's a needed aspect. Having said that, models, although inadequate, still can provide useful information, and it might be that you're understanding whether a direction of decisions is this way or this way, but it's not going to tell you exactly which decision to make. Similarly, the outcomes that I shared are for populations in sort of a distributional sense of percentage likely beneficiaries or losses. We are not trying to do deterministic answers for exactly what to do. All we can say is that it's likely that this is probably a better direction in terms of planning than this one. We do have persons who have found that to be useful, including a case for Zimbabwe where we were working with the ministry there. They wanted us actually to go speak with the farmers to see if some of the adaptations that we were talking about in terms of bringing into the models were of interest to them, because he wanted to make sure if he actually worked in this direction, there would be a possibility of uptake. And I think that kind of involvement where you're actually taking direction from the people who are working in the ground who would implement that policy for the benefit of the farmers, having that as an input is really important for many reasons, and potential uptake probably being the key on that. The final thing I want to say is that the pest and disease problem, among others, is one that will be addressed in an upcoming workshop. The global workshop of AgMIP is going to be in Costa Rica with our partners ICA. So, and Katia, I'm going to find you later. We're really looking forward to a very dynamic session. That'll be April 24th to 26th, 2018 in San Jose at the ICA headquarters. And we're really excited because a lot of our partners there are very keen to explore some of these methodologies for Latin America. And my time is up.
Thank you, Caroline. Lida, would you give a quick answer to that question of reaching end users?
Yeah, we do not train farmers directly. I don't think any of the institutions that work at the field do that. What we do is to train trainers, what we call facilitators, which are members of producer organization, grassroots organization, or government station services. So they are the ones who train the families. What we do is training them and do a quality control of the work, how they are applying that knowledge. And we also provide material for them so they can use it when they are doing the training.
Thank you. I think the last answer goes to Danush.
Thank you, Dada, for that question. I don't think I can answer it in 2 minutes, but what I can do is I can direct you to some resources for doing that, that is mainstreaming gender, not as a tick box exercise, but actually as part of a gender empowerment strategy. And GACSA, my colleague Sophia, who's here with us today, together with FAO, has produced a practice brief on gender-sensitive CSA, and it looks at how CSA interventions can address gender differences in different contexts. So that would be a good starting point to look at this. But again, we had, just 2 weeks ago, we had the CSA Science Conference in Johannesburg, and where gender was again a topic of discussion. And one of the key outcomes, I think Martin will present it tomorrow, is the opportunity that CSA has in terms of addressing the gender inequality in agriculture. So that is a real opportunity here in using CSA to drive gender transformation. And that would be really, with the support of regions like ASEAN. So there is a real opportunity there, and there should be more discussion on this, and we should certainly do that afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Danush. We made it 1.5 hours and a chance given to 11 people to contribute to CSA knowledge. So again, a big clap to all of them. And thank you to the wonderful audience. Goodbye.
Okay, just a brief announcement. Downstairs is already the coffee break, but before that, at the same place, there is a show that Emilia Romagna with Parmigiano Reggiano decided to, with GACSA, to give you, and is a typical traditional cut of Parmesan cheese. So you are very welcome.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. My name's Matthew Reddy. I'm the Director for Climate Smart Agriculture with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and also the Director for the Global Agribusiness Alliance. It's my pleasure to welcome our panel here this afternoon. Before we do that, we have a couple of announcements. The first one is, if you're wearing a black coat, just check the sleeves. Do they quite fit? Because someone has lost a black coat. Alison has lost a black coat. So if you think you might have someone else's black coat or picked one up, it's easily done. It was on the back of a chair. So the black coat, please check. I'd also like to invite Dr. Leslie Lipper from FAO just to make an announcement for us all.
Thanks very much. The announcement is that I'm very happy to tell you all that a book, a Climate Smart Agriculture giant book, has just been published. And it's focused much more on the resilience dimension of climate smart agriculture, both the sort of analytical and conceptual approaches to it and a lot of case studies. The book is free, it's open access, and there's flyers outside there about the book, the contents, and how to download it. Please take a look. There's also a lot of discussion about some of the controversies of CSA and some of the discussion that's already been held here today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Leslie, and I think that solves a lot of Christmas present problems for people, doesn't it? A nice book. My wife said go to Rome and pick up something nice at Christmas. I'm sure she'll love to read about case studies in climate smart agriculture. Okay, good. Before we start with the panel, another couple of announcements. Thursday afternoon, there's a couple of really terrific sessions going on Thursday afternoon. We have the African Development Bank session. So people that are interested in the regional developments for Africa, Thursday afternoon, but it conflicts with an ASEAN development session. So there's an investment in ASEAN CSA session. So you have to decide on Thursday afternoon which session you would like to go to. So I just wanted to flag that one. Right, everyone's here. So in front of you, you have a piece of paper. This session is from the Investment Action Group. So what I'd like you all to do is when you're listening to our presenters, or maybe you've brought some ideas here today already, think about one thing you would like the Investment Action Group to do over the next 2 years. So if you could consider, well, what it is that you would like to see as a deliverable from that group, write it on your piece of paper. You might want to listen to the presentations first, but write it on the piece of paper, the one thing that you would like the Investment Action Group to do next year, and we will collect those at the exit on the way out. So if I could ask everybody to do that. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our panel this afternoon. We're going to address some of the key issues around investment in climate smart agriculture. As you know, when the original GACSA was formed, this was pre-SDG, it was pre-NDC, and now we have, if we didn't have a big impetus to invest in CSA, we certainly do now. 90% of countries have indicated agriculture as a mitigation or adaptation strategy in their NDCs. Only 70% of countries have listed transport in their mitigation strategy. So even more important perhaps for countries than transport is agriculture. So this is a good framing for how we can consider climate smart agriculture. So it's my pleasure to introduce this afternoon Martin Boilia, who will close our session from NEPAD. We have Danush, who's going to, from CCAFS, who is going to open the discussion with a really nice piece of work that's been done by CCAFS on the best bets for adaptation. I don't like that title, Best Bets, because it sounds like a gamble. These are surefire return on investments. So Danush is going to open there. AG is going to then talk a little bit more about the farmer's perspective. Yes, we do have farmers here from that question. Lisa is going to talk to us about a brilliant new investment fund and how we can think about that as a model for scaling up. Oh no, Marietta is going to talk about the scaling up model. Lisa is going to talk about the IFAD experience at the country level. Pan is going to talk to us about the work that's being done by Climate Kick. Emmanuel mentioned Climate Kick. Let's think about that from an investor incubator perspective. And last but not least, Mark Manus is going to share some thoughts with us about how we can consider COP23 an integration of our respective work programs and a set of work for going forward. So first of all, I'd like to welcome to the stage Danush, who will give us his presentation from CCAFS.
Thank you, Matthew, for this opportunity. And good evening again, everyone. What Matthew's asked me to cover is this 10 best bet innovations, or as he outlined, it's not a bet that we want in terms of investing in agriculture. We want priorities and areas where private sector and others can invest. And so we would cover 10 such areas in this presentation, which would pave the way for further discussion as well. I mean, all of you here in this room are experts on agriculture and climate change, and so I don't want to run this message again. And Matthew's already mentioned how agriculture has been prioritized, and I just want to show this map to show how agriculture has been prioritized for adaptation, and similarly for mitigation. And this is really the basis based on which we develop the work further moving forward. So I was at the COP, and I'm sure many of you were, and I just want to bring out some perspectives which I found very interesting, which came out from speakers at some of the events which CCAFS was involved in. And that, previously we saw what the priorities were, but these perspectives, to me, they show what are the challenges in making these priorities a reality. So these are just quotes which I picked up from what I heard there in the COP. So the very first quote, this came from Margarita Estrelaga from IFAD, who directs the climate division, was the whole issue around channeling finance, public climate finance into agriculture. And as she points out here, it's only out of the 391 billion in 2014, only 7 billion went to agriculture, mitigation, and adaptation. That was one challenge, I think. The second one, which came from the Green Climate Fund, which looks at how the focus for the private sector is fairly on energy generation, and we see very few projects focused on agriculture and land use. So this is the second challenge, which is the focus of the private sector. And the third challenge, and this came from the private sector as well, which is, on one hand, you're calling for more finance, and another group is saying we have more finance, but what we don't have is bankable projects to direct this finance to. So that's basically the starting point for us. If this is the situation, what are the areas where we can demonstrate, based on work within the CGR and beyond, on these are areas where you have bankable projects, where we can scale up financing, and that's what we've strived to do. We had a series of 8 events at the COP, which was called the Agriculture Advantage, and we tried to make the case for investing in agriculture in partnership with WBCSD, IFAD, CTA, and many others. And this is the product which I'm referring to. So this is not me writing this. This comes from across the CGIAR, multiple centers and research programs, 25 different colleagues who've come together to think, and what are the best bet innovations? Okay, I have less than 4 minutes left, so I'll just go very quickly. So you can read, it's a 70-page document, you can read more about each of these innovations. They are not new. So for instance, we have agroforestry is one of the priority areas identified, and we know the benefits it can deliver for resilience for mitigation and for productivity as well in different contexts. Another interesting thing is about the nutrition benefits which agroforestry is able to deliver. Aquaculture is again another priority area, particularly in Africa where there is much potential for scaling up this innovation. Stress-tolerant varieties, we've focused on maize, wheat, rice, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, and we've mapped some success stories both in Asia and Africa and Latin America, but there is much potential for scale up. And you can see, for instance, in the case of maize, there is a potential to increase yields by 40% in severe stress conditions and no penalty in a normal year. So these are some promising innovations. Another area for investment is smallholder dairy, where we can also deliver much across these three pillars pertinent to CSA. Alternate wetting and drying in rice systems, the potential to reduce emissions by 50%, reduce water use and associated costs for pumping by 30%. So this is again one of these innovations which we've identified. Micro-irrigation powered by solar energy, this is gaining a lot of traction in my home country, India, but there is much potential, for instance, in Africa, if we want to increase irrigation by 200%. We want to be leapfrogging some of the challenges in traditional irrigation development. So, but, you know, we have been talking a lot about transformation, and if we want to drive agricultural transformation, and this is the same figure that Evan Gervitz showed this morning, we're really touching on these two small boxes here when we talk about technologies and innovations practices at the field level. But there are other things which we think should be addressed. Firstly, you know, we think climate advisory services and early warning systems, this should be a priority, and we focus one of these innovations on this area, on climate-informed advisories, which can help better decision-making, improve fertilizer use, increase yields, and a good case study is from Senegal, where they've scaled this up, improved seasonal advisories to some 7 million rural households. The other area which we think is promising and is part of this mix for transformation is on big data and two-way extension. We need to get to a point where farmers can actually post real-time their questions and get that answered by the extension services. So digital agriculture is a very promising area which we think should be exploited, and agriculture is one of the sectors which have not used digital technologies to its full potential. Moving on, index-based agricultural insurance, not only in crops but in livestock, floods as well. These have been piloted in different regions, and this could be again be scaled up. Again, a lot of good practice in India, where in the state of Maharashtra it's been scaled up to 1 million farmers just last year, and in other geographies as well. But this cannot be achieved without associated investment business activity, and it's great that we're speaking in the Investment Action Group panel, and we need significantly more public-private partnerships. And it's great that Matthew is really leading this effort in the Investment Action Group. So we feel that there is this whole area of blended finance which has not been exploited as much as it could be, and that is an area certainly for research for CCAPs and also for action for this group here. And just to conclude, and I rushed through because of the lack of time, but happy to have conversations on these. None of this transformation can occur without, I think our colleague here pointed out, without the inclusion of farmers and strong farmer organizations and networks, which should be one of the cornerstones of this transformation, together with the technologies, together with the services, together with the finance and the business case, and also, and Mark will speak more to it, from the Enabling Environment Group is the enabling policy. And together, I think it's these best bets is for part of the steps which we need for driving agricultural transformation under climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinesh. That was terrific. And I'm reminded of Landcare's declaration whilst COP23 was going on. International Landcare had a meeting in Nagoya, and they had a Nagoya declaration that emphasised that very thing, that if we are going to implement these things, we must invest a concomitant amount in social infrastructure, farmer infrastructure and farmer networks to achieve these as well. So I think that's a very good point. Next to the stage, I'd like to welcome a person that's very well known to us, A.G. Kawamura. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. How is that cheese? So delicacies of life. I think everybody, it's more than fair to say that so many of us have all spent some large part of our lives working on different aspects of those sustainable development goals, but the articulation of those goals into a very elegant new world that we might create here in this next X amount of years has given many of us in agriculture for the first time an incredibly important document that allows us to talk about the importance of agriculture, because I think we all recognize that if agriculture is doing poorly on this planet, you cannot accomplish those goals. That being said, and the idea that if we look then at the world through a different lens, that different lens will change our vision, and our vision of what the world can be is probably as exciting as it's ever going to be at this stage going forward. And we can all probably acknowledge that we're on the cusp of an agricultural renaissance if everything is moving forward, and more importantly, we can efficiently achieve these goals. In California and across the United States, I think there's been tremendous efforts over these last decades to try and get out of our silos, if you will. In California, over a decade ago, there was an effort to try and say, what does the future of the San Joaquin Valley look like, a very big agricultural area? And they said, what does it look like in the year 2030? The governor at the time, Governor Schwarzenegger, said, well, why don't we do a strategic plan for the economy for all of California and start looking at all sectors about what we can see in the future. For us, it was an opportunity then to do a visioning process on what agriculture looks like into the future. And that effort started to melt those silos and started to make us realize that we need alignment. We need a time of collaboration, and as me said, we need unusual collaborations, if you will. We really need to start to look at the way we would accomplish these things through a different set of vision. Governments then play either an enabling role or an obstacle role, and in our state it's been both. We find that the challenge is trying to get people to recognize that the vision up ahead requires a defining new infrastructure for the 21st century. It needs to establish kind of a different way of looking at what 21st century agriculture is all about. It starts to understand, you start to understand that in that process we were actually given an opportunity to create a different sector called the Working Landscapes Workgroup. And what is a working landscapes? It's a working landscape is something that delivers multiple benefits, whether they're ecosystem benefits, financial benefits, whether they create new markets, whether they move that dial from waste to energy or from waste to value. All of these ideas that we would repurpose abandoned properties, we would look at the resources that we have within our state, and through that different lens start to align them towards these sustainable development goals. It's an exciting time the minute you do that, because now everybody seems to have a role in one way or the other of helping to facilitate those goals. The cap and trade market that was in Chicago that didn't last well, and the one that's in California now, is a perfect example of government creating an obstacle or creating the pathway for these things to accelerate and open the door for investors to jump in. That role of government, pushed by NGOs, pushed by the business industry to try and give them a path of certainty, is one of the biggest challenges I think we have in front of us. For those of us in agriculture, so many times we have no idea what's going to happen in the United States with our immigration and with our labor, with our next path for good intention regulations that might shut us down on our diesel emissions or our use of one chemical or another. These are challenging times, but they can be worked with if we look at the model of trying to work from the bottom up, work with the producers, the ranchers, the foresters, the folks that are actually making the moves, making the changes and those transformations. I know that one of the earlier speakers was talking about getting 9 different countries together to talk about their forestry activities, and to see if collectively collectively they could all compare notes and get into their best practices, and by doing so have all boats rising. And I'd love to talk to her. I was going to ask that question actually in that last session to say how much progress did they make for Maria Rosa's presentation, how much progress is being made by getting them all together and comparing who's doing the best work and how quickly can they replicate and scale that work up. In our country, in the United States, of course, we have this thing called the land-grant college, and the USDA is a part of that, this idea that everybody has access to education and must be made available to all the citizenry. The next step was the Ag Extension, which is now 100 years old, and that access to practical knowledge, access to applied sciences that we can actually use as farmers. I actually learned how to farm because of the cooperative extension. I'd go down there and look at the microfiche, I'm dating myself, the little pamphlets of how to farm. It's amazing how we now have this opportunity to retool the land-grant college, the cooperative extension, outreach, and we spoke about that today, is if those extensions nationally are the points of transformative information change, how exciting that is. This new discipline, if you will, of the nexus between water, energy, food, and tech is pretty exciting. In California, for example, there's quite a big movement to kind of introduce the Silicon Valley to the Salinas Valley, and this new partnership of collaboration with investment, with venture capital, is creating a pretty exciting hub, if you will, of innovation hubs driven by accelerators, new technologies, the farmers showing up, the ranchers, saying this is what we need from the tech community, and trying to bring those minds together around the solution sets for what our biggest problems are. It might be water, it might be nutrient deficiency or nutrient excess, it might be waste products that we need to ramp up and turn into energy products. All of this is taking place then while we watch the rest of the world, while we watch ourselves jump enormous miles, if you will, in our own farming practices. I know that I used to do drip irrigation was something that we embraced about 25, 30 years ago. But in my lifetime, I've been farming for 40 years. We were furrow irrigating with just canals not that long ago. Just a generation before me, we were still using in the United States animal agriculture for our power base. And I remember touching those animals as a kid. That's how much things are changing, and sometimes we don't get the credit for how much change is happening. But believe me, whether it's new varieties that we're growing that are heat tolerant, drought resistance, whether it's new varieties that allow us to get through some of the toughest disease outbreaks that we're faced with now, that toolbox we have to build, we have to make it more robust. The process of investing in that toolbox, investing in new technology, investing in the innovation where a farmer gets a helping hand to be an early adapter. In many cases, sometimes being an early adapter is the greatest punishment because you spend the most money failing at your early adaptation. And so what I'd like to say is in our wonderful group called Solutions from the Land, we've been working in different watersheds trying to create a solution set to move a commodity group or a group of producers, get the bullseye off their back, if you will. And I'm a farmer, so I'm always got my violin out. Oh wait, I've got a cello out because I can always complain about how tough it is to be a farmer. But with that, we need help, we need innovation, we need new tools, and as we go into one watershed or the other and we try and look at a waste problem like chicken litter and turning that into, for the poultry, into turning that into an energy fertilizer, carbon-based situation where you can create some new value there. If it's trying to stop nitrification, if it's trying to repurpose properties that are sitting abandoned currently but can be turned into great new sources of fruits and vegetables in the urban area. These are all solution sets that require a tremendous amount of investment. And so this investment working group, it is an action group, and we're active, and we're looking for tremendous amounts of dollars to come in from government, from NGOs, and more importantly, from the private sector as we transform ourselves, driven by these sustainable development goals. Thanks.
Thank you, AG, and hopefully that'll get the pencils scribbling as you hear about the Silicon Valley to the Salinas Valley with technology transfer. So next I'd like to welcome to the panel Lisa Leclerc, who's going to talk to us about IFAD's work.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here speaking. I have to provide full disclosure. I've been at IFAD for 2 weeks, and so I'm not the best person to speak in detail about IFAD's work. But what I do come from is a climate finance background, and since the topic of this group is investment, I thought that it could be interesting to have my perspective on the global climate finance architecture and landscape and how that maybe applies to some of the work that you've been discussing here and that some of the previous speakers have also mentioned. So in terms of total climate finance, before I go into these numbers, I'd start by pointing out that there's been a tremendous amount of growth and evolution in the climate finance landscape. When I started going to the negotiations on climate finance in 1999, so I'm dating myself now as well, there was one climate finance item on the agenda. At COP23 that just happened in Bonn, there were 13 dedicated climate finance agenda items, and it's become a cross-cutting issue across all areas, which indicates quite a bit that we are moving to action. The global community is thinking much more about larger amounts of investment. The good news is that under that process, there's a group that does an assessment of global climate finance flows, and it shows that this is increasing. The numbers that I have here shows a 15% increase in this time frame from 2011 to 2014. This is total amounts of global finance, and I have a graphic that'll illustrate that a little bit more. I was just reading this morning, as many of you know, the French government is hosting the Climate Finance Days yesterday and today. Because it marks the 2-year anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement, which includes a goal on adaptation, on mitigation, and also on climate finance. And it's also the 20-year anniversary of the Kyoto Protocol. Also, at the same time, they just announced, they showed some figures that the last quarter, so of 2017, so from July to September, was the second highest quarter in terms of issuance of green bonds ever. And 52% of those issuing bonds were new investments and were led by Mexico and China, so emerging markets. So a lot of these numbers hide that some of it is domestic investment, but there's also an increasing trend in investment, South-South investment and cooperation, which is very interesting, I think, for the agriculture sector. In the climate change process as well, there's been a global commitment by a group of developed countries to have $100 billion a year by 2020 of climate flows from developed to developing countries. This graphic is a little bit, it's hard to read, I'm sure, from where you're sitting, but basically the message that I want to communicate with this is that this larger circle, so the blue area, are these total climate finance flows. So this is private sector, this is public sector. The darker colors are where the data is much clearer, where we have consistent and easy to trace data. The private sector financing is a lot more difficult to trace. The smaller area in the middle, so the green area, are the flows from developed to developing countries. And so you see it is a little bit smaller, but it is still quite significant. The dark green areas are, again, the one where we have very clear information and data and comparable from year to year, and so there's a clear trend and growth in those areas. The very small circle that you might see is called UNFCCC funds, and you see it sort of at the bottom, the small egg-shaped dark green circle at the bottom, and within it that small UNFCCC funds. This is the Global Environment Facility, the GEF LDCF, I'm using acronyms, but basically the climate funds, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and the Global Environment Facility. This is, just for perspective, the amount of funding that is. We tend to focus quite a bit on these funds in climate investment and climate agriculture, but it's actually quite small. And there's a lot of opportunity to tap into some of these larger sources for different parts, different stakeholders in the process. generally, the numbers that we see in terms of the distribution of how climate financing is spent on mitigation or adaptation, the dark green is the mitigation, and the green and the blue to a certain extent is adaptation. So more or less about 25% to 30% of climate finance is spent on adaptation and roughly 75% on mitigation. Within that, the numbers that tend to come up quite often as well, whether it's looking at public or private financing for adaptation, mitigation in the agriculture sector, is roughly 7 to 10%. It varies on the numbers that you look at. So it's still quite small in comparison to the contribution that agriculture can make to the climate change problem, and also how the climate change, the agriculture sector is affected. So the climate finance landscape has evolved quite a bit. It's become quite complex, but a lot of the money it's not necessarily cash in hand. It's the financial system that's redirecting a lot of flows towards these climate-friendly investments. And that can be a challenge, I think, for the smallholder and the local level types of stakeholders. We've also found with a lot of the initiation, a lot of these funds, that absorptive capacity is an issue. When all of these funds under the climate change process came on board and became operational, we were expecting floodgates of projects coming to these funds looking for financing, and it was very slow in the uptake. So when you look at the amount of money in the funds and how much has been dispersed, it's actually kind of surprising that the disbursement rate is quite low. So there are too some opportunities, but it also points possibly to some challenges and reasons why accessing some of these financing is an issue. And so for the smallholders, and the reason, the information that I've drawn this from is one of the other, I think, transformations or innovations with a lot of the climate funds is this direct access. So in the past, I'd say up until about maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, you had to go through a multilateral organization to access these funds. National entities can now access these multilateral funds directly. But one of the challenges with getting that money trickling down to the local level, or the community level, is often size. And so where we've seen some success is where there have been some pooling of resources and pooling of cooperatives, of farmers groups, local groups, whichever sector you look at, in order to access these loans and have the capital to be able to access grants as well. Another barrier is the knowledge that's required of the climate finance landscape, how to access this investment for the smallholder. And for a lot of institutions, climate change knowledge. And so there's a lot of discussion of climate variability and adapting systems to past climate trends, but it's not as clearly articulated when projects are going forward, how it responds to future climate change as well. And a lot of these funds are focused and dedicated on to future climate change as well. The enabling environments in national institutions, the common challenges that come up for national and regional entities accessing financing are technology constraints, legal frameworks, legal entities of the institutions trying to access funds, political instability as well, which lends to a significant amount of risk for investors, institutional capacity to manage funds. And so a lot of entities are managing to access funds and receive some funding, but don't necessarily have the capacity to oversee the management, the implementation of the climate funds. And also critical mass of bankable projects in order to attract some of these large-scale institutional types of investors into countries. And so with that, thank you very much. I hope it was useful.
Thanks very much. And I think now we're going to rely on technology, aren't we, Marietta? Would you like to introduce your video?
Good afternoon, everybody. And before I start, just for those who don't know, UNEP changed its name. Now we are called UN Environment, so that you may hear different pronunciation. Before starting my presentation, I introduce to you the new partnership that the UN Environmental entered with Rabobank. I would like to show you a very brief presentation that provides rationale of this initiative and why UN Environment gets involved in this. So now we'll go down. this. No. Sorry, made a mistake here.
No problem at all.
Sorry, I just
should be fine.
Did you know that on average, 7 million hectares of tropical forests disappear every year? The equivalent of 26 football fields every minute. Most of it comes from agriculture, whether from efficient, large farming businesses or low-yield smallholder farmers. But in order to feed our rising population, farmers need to produce more, and their most cost-effective solution is for them to deforest new terrain. However, today, nearly 40% of our land surface is already dedicated to agriculture. If this goes on, we won't tackle the climate crisis or meet the Sustainable Development Goals. It is critical that we transition to deforestation-free agriculture. But there are obstacles. First, farmers need technical knowledge to increase yields and at the same time preserve existing forests. Communities and businesses need incentives to restore degraded landscapes, and they need the capacity to implement integrated agroforestry systems where crops, cattle, and forest are mixed. Second, the transition also requires considerable funds, which farmers need to borrow from someone. But lenders and investors face costs and financial risks when financing the transition to sustainable farming. There is a need for governments, public, and private finance institutions to scale up the availability of tools such as credit guarantees and junior or first loss loans. These are forms of insurance. In case the borrower cannot reimburse his loan, the lender is covered for part of his losses, lowering the risk of such an investment. Grants are also needed to support smallholder farmers with training, development, and replanting, as well as monitoring the progress of businesses and communities to stop deforestation. By coordinating the appropriate government, financial, and corporate actors, UN Environment and partners can trigger a transformational shift in leveraging public funding to unlock and scale up private finance flowing to saving forests, restoring landscapes, and transitioning to climate-smart agriculture. Let's work together to make this global transformation happen.
Having challenges here in technology.
No problem.
So why cost? Well,
oh, come on. Yeah, wait. Please don't touch it. So, there you are.
Okay. Thank you very much, and apologies. That ate a couple of my minutes. So the new facility was formally announced 2 months ago in Mexico City on 17th of October during the World Business Council for Sustainable Development plenary session. It's the major part of this partnership between Rabobank and UN Environment is to set up a 1 billion facility to initiate land restoration and forest protection initiatives. The facility is targeting to provide grants, loans, and other forms of credit to clients which are involved in sustainable agriculture production, processing, or trades of soft commodities. and a set of social and environmental safeguards are envisaged that make sure that all the clients strictly meet the provisions for forest protection, restoration, and also involving small farm holders. The program is aiming to push farmers to use more sustainable production practices. Thought there will be higher potential risks for lower yield or higher costs. The initiative will be implemented within the framework of 3 to 4 years, and it will start with a couple of projects in Brazil, Indonesia, and West Africa and Southeast Asia. In Brazil, the partnership will promote, and where feasible, of course, finance integrated crop, livestock, and forestry farming practices on the 17 million hectares of existing farmland. That is based on an ongoing project Brazilian farmers financed by Rabobank as part of the partnership with WWF, facilitated through the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. In Indonesia, the program will finance replanting schemes for smallholders in partnership with corporate clients, not directly with small farm holders, but through corporate clients of the finance sector, including forest and biodiversity protection, restoration, and certification of palm oil. The focus in West Africa will be again on the commodities cocoa, and East Asia rice. One can ask the question, why UN Environment is getting into this business. You probably got some understanding from the presentation, but generally, nowadays, with the population growth, food production increase, food insecurity, and on the other side, the global commitments to meet Paris Climate Agreement, H biodiversity targets, bond challenge restoration targets, and more broadly SDGs, it is not possible to do the business as usual. It is in the global community, not only conservation community, but globally, it is increasingly, there is understanding that private finance, it is really critical in addition to public financing to address the challenges that we are facing related to biodiversity loss, land degradation, and deforestation. And that's why there is a need to better balance economic development with poverty alleviation and conservation targets, and of course climate change. So for Rabobank, it is clear, it's part of initiative of program that they call Kickstart Food Initiative, which consists of 4 focus areas: earth, waste, sustainability, and nutrition. And this particular facility is part of their first area, earth, which is aiming on sustainable and environmentally sound food production. The rationale is, I cannot say better than the CEO of the Rabobank. You can read in the screen why Rabobank gets involved into this. Generally, it is the facility is for food security, is for climate change, is for biodiversity, and reduction of deforestation, and most importantly, is to provide funding to make it happen. For UN Environment, this is part of a broader push that started several years ago to get engaged financial institutions in new business model, taking into consideration environmental dimensions. That work is based on the rationale that in the achievements already made in the energy sector, where private financing actually is shifting transition towards more renewable energy, more sustainable energy sources in comparison to fossil fuel-based economy. The same needs to happen to redirect capital towards sustainable land use. And new business models have been tried through UN Environment Finance Initiative Group in partnership with financial institutions to redirect cash flow to decouple deforestation from agriculture production to make shift of financing so the environment dimensions are taken into consideration. I would like to highlight here that the work that has been going on and piloted is primarily related to climate and deforestation within the RED Plus group. It's still to go on in the agriculture per se. For UN environment, we have a very few minutes left. For UN environment, it's important that that partnership is used as a model, as a starting point for other financial institutions to try to readjust their lending mechanism so environment is taken into consideration. And we believe that it will work. It is still a question of years to show the success. And currently, our colleagues and partners from UN financial initiatives and Rabobank are working on the environmental social safeguards that will be taken into consideration in the projects that will be funded in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Marietta. And I just want to point out here the formation of that partnership for that $1 billion facility. That actually came from a meeting that was convened. Is Imelda here? No, but with the Climate Resilience Network, ourselves, WBCSD, Jim was there, Alan was there, IRI was there, and I think that shows the value of some of these regional programs that we have. Oh, Bernard was there with these regional programs. That brought the group together to say, well, what can we do? And it was from that meeting that that fund was born. So I would like to underscore the value of having those regional meetings. Now, AG talked about innovation, incubators, and what can we do? Well, I'd like to welcome Pan to the stage, who's going to talk to us about the work of Climate Kick. Emmanuel mentioned Climate Kick, so we're going to hear a little bit about the motivations for Climate Kick. Yeah, just like that.
Hi everyone, I'm Pan. I manage the CSA flagship program for Climate Kick, which is Europe's largest public-private climate innovation partnership. So we fund and support mostly innovation and entrepreneurship activities in the climate space. And the CSA flagship is focused on climate smart agriculture. I realize it's late, so I will try to go quickly. Agriculture is a complex space. So one of the things that Climate Kick believes is that in order to instigate systematic change, you need to leverage multiple levers and engage all stakeholders on multiple fronts. So I just want to highlight a few things we're doing. We're creating an open innovation platform, agrisource.org, which will be launched tomorrow. Imra will make a presentation on that. We're creating a solution database. We launched the CSA MOOC, English this year, and being translated to French, German, Chinese next year. We are creating regional hubs. And we fund projects in agri-tech, agri-finance, insurance, and also provide technical assistance. So Climate Kick has adopted this theory of change framework where you define long-term impact goals, and from that you work backwards. What are the outcomes and outputs in near term? Now, this is the impact goal for climate smart agriculture. Now, it looks very simplistic, but I think one thing we should remember is that it's good to have simple, achievable goals rather than very ambitious, unachievable, unmeasurable goals. So even here, we haven't defined what's the order of magnitude, but the point is that we want to increase the application and adoption of CSA solutions. Again, I'm not going to go through all these achievements, but the main point is that through this experience, over the last 18 months, what we have learned in terms of what's needed in accelerating and scaling up CSA investments. So again, I'm just quickly putting this so that you can have a look in some of our projects. But I only joined Climate 18 months ago, and I did come from the private sector investment background. So we achieved a lot over this 18 months in terms of impact. And so it's really, really encouraging to see the speed in the growth of our partners and scope of our activities. So what are the lessons? And those are lessons, learnings from those 18 months experience. First of all, I think we need to use public capital de-risk CSA investments and incentivize private capital. I actually feel that public money needs to take more risk in funding early stage disruptive technologies. Often public capital are not risk taking enough. And we need to provide not only seed, but growth capital to enable CSA startups to scale. I find a lot of startups are stuck in seed stage and unable to scale and demonstrate at scale. We really need to develop interconnected, well-networked ecosystems to really connect first research and private sector, and then also all of the relevant stakeholders, because we see a lot of disconnect between the actors across the agricultural value chain. Now, of course, I'm talking more in the European context, because that's our experience, but I think it's also applicable in other regions. And we need to engage farmers. I think they are the most difficult stakeholder group to engage, but we must engage them, because they're the ones that will adopt the solution, actually use it. And finally, on leveraging and blending climate finance for agriculture. There's a lot of money for climate finance. And we heard before that despite this availability of funds, often we don't know where to put it. And I think CSA could be using an approach to achieving the social good. We need to see CSA and achieving a reliable, sustainable food supply as a social good. And that CSA in an approach to do that. That's it.
Thanks, Pan, and I think it's very important that you point out about the role of public and private finance and that need to de-risk and take more risk. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mark Manus. Mark, as you know, has been a staunch supporter from the start of GACSA, so it's a real pleasure to welcome Mark to the podium.
I want to talk about the COP decision, and the time is ticking. I want to talk about it from 4 perspectives. I want to give you the context. I want to give a little bit of history. I want to address the key elements of it and the way forward. What's the context here? This was a decision by ministers that had to be unanimous of 195 parties. This doesn't happen often, and it happened about a month ago. And it directed the UNFCCC to do certain things. That's huge, it's important. So that's the context. 2, history. We've been laboring at this for many, many years without any success. This is the first substantive decision on agriculture ever in the UN. This is big. 3, what are the key elements? There are at least 6 key elements. 1, it's a joint endeavor, which we've not had before, between the implementing body and the scientific and technological body to address issues related to agriculture. 2, it references the need for workshops. 3, and this is important, bringing in expert input and advice to move the process forward. 4, the constituted bodies of the UN, so that's some of the finance bodies are engaged. And 5, to consider vulnerabilities to agriculture, and 6, referencing food security. So those are the key elements in the introductory paragraph. What does this mean? What's the way forward? And there are at least 4 key dimensions to that. The first would be for parties and observers to submit their views on what I'm describing to you by March 31st. And then the second element is here, then it will be considered in the meetings in May in Bonn. What are the specific elements that have been addressed? And I think this is where it's really important and where I argue that it's a really substantive way forward. It lists very concrete and important aspects that we need to address collectively, 195 parties for agriculture. They include, among others, adaptation, adaptation co-benefits, soil conservation, soil health, manure management, livestock management, food security dimensions. So what I like about this is that, I guess I didn't mention in history, that the only other decision we had on agriculture back in Durban in COP17, it just said address issues related to agriculture, very vague, and we meandered for many years. Now we have these very concrete topics that we need to address. I'd also add that in the decision, the COP decision, it says start with these and then do others. So I see this in effect as a long-term appropriate program of work to cover areas that should resonate with us in GACSA that we can feed into. And then finally, the last element here is to report to the ministers to the COP in 2020 on progress. Now, the way it works in the UN, this is the ideal. We may or may not make progress, but it sets a road forward that we've never seen before. And you cannot deny the importance of the multilateral institution because it involves 195 parties, which is bigger than any other entity. So I think in the days to come, meaning tomorrow and Thursday for GACSA, we should reflect on what this means. And I argue and think that we can be part of this, and it actually enhances the value and the need for the issues that we're trying to address here. So I look at it as an opportunity, and I think we should collectively look at it as an opportunity. One, and finally, it's really a big deal, and it's quite important, and let's embrace it and figure out how we can work together to address this opening that has been put before us a month ago. Thank you.
5 minutes. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. So, those notes, how are they going? Hope they're being scribbled down. Get a few of the points down there. Frame within the NDCs. You might also think of UNCCD, the sister convention there as well, in terms of what you might think for CSA. So our final speaker to wrap up, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Martin Boualia, who is our co-chair of GACSA.
Thank you, Matthew. I do appreciate that it's towards the end of the day, and many things begin to shut down. So I will not spend too much time. I'll be quite quick on my remarks. Also appreciating that the panel has actually covered a lot of very, very important and relevant issues. Let me start by first acknowledging that the word investment is being used, rightly so, and I think very deliberately so, but recognizing that in fact for circumstances like in Africa, you're actually talking about a space or bringing this whole narrative into a space that has been driven by development aid for actually decades. And therefore, to begin to actually bring a narrative on investment, we need to bear in mind that for so long, and what many situations may be used to has actually been driven by development aid on one side. On the other side, acknowledging that, in fact, there's a realization that development aid, the way we've known it in the last 2-3 decades, is probably on the way out. And probably will never come in that same way in terms of volumes of available financing and some of the issues that went with that. So that is the first point when we're looking at the issues of financing into CSM. The second point, and again actually also related to that scenario where development aid has been a strong element in the whole financing for development, is actually the focus on equality away from the focus on the volumes of financing. And this, again, is a key issue, especially in Africa, in terms of financing. And how do we move towards issues of value for money, accountability, the issues of branding and actually connecting across the various interests, and in that process make more financing available or get delivery more from the little available. The third point is the issue of that when you hear a lot of talk about financing, there's quite a heavy focus on the supply side, what I would call supply side. Some of the panelists have mentioned issues related to the demand side in terms of project preparation, in terms of issues of de-risking, insurance, and actually the readiness in the systems, or even in making the systems to access some of this financing much more accessible, much more easier and implementable. So that is another area that is actually of concern, or where we can actually make a difference as GACSA, and I'll come back to the issue of the action group. Lastly is actually the issue of CSA making business sense. Again, in the development circles, we have advanced a lot of technologies, practices, very much on the public good side, and in fact, locking out the whole business conversation. So what I'm saying is here is that we have to acknowledge and embrace actually that business element, because a lot of the actual innovation and sustainability of our programs and processes relates to the fact that CSA should make business sense for everybody, including small, medium enterprises and farmers. And lastly, let me just raise 3 issues in terms of what then should GACSA and GACSA Action Group focus on. Number one is how do we get the platform and networking in GACSA to actually provide accessible information on financing options. A lot of this information on financing is Greek to many of the practitioners and people that actually need financing. So how do we demystify that and allow access to that? Number 2 is how do we support business to actually find their feet in advancing climate smart agriculture. And I'm talking about the business capacity on research, on innovation, on science, and how that can actually be rallied towards finding solutions that will accelerate the whole drive on climate smart agriculture. And lastly, issue of information support for decision making, and ultimately, how do we optimize public sector financing in those public-private partnerships, in those branded arrangements, but what can we do as a platform in terms of tools, in terms of information that enables public sector financing to be in the right place at the right time to support the whole advancement of climate smart agriculture. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. That's a very nice conclusion to the panel this afternoon. So let's remember our pieces that we've written down. If we could just leave them on the end desk there. You see, as you exit, if you follow that desk there, if you could just leave them in a pile there, we'll collect those. Jeremy's writing the notes from this meeting, and then we'll present those as well as part of the session on Thursday. So please join me in thanking all of our panellists for their insight this evening. Thank you very much indeed. And that concludes the end of the session. And no announcements? Okay. But back to the Parmesan and wine. Thanks, Carl. That's great. I've noted those three things down that you said. So, pardon? We have to end. Yeah, sorry.